everybody. We're ready to start our next session. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Colleen Keyes. I'll be chairing this session. We enjoyed that last session so much, and I look forward to a very lively discussion after our presenters make their presentations. Today, at this panel, we'll be talking about the Muslim subject in media discourses and how to respond to it. So our first speaker and presenter is Anisa Mehdi. She's a writer, educator, producer, director of Inside Mecca for the National Geographic. And her title is The Arts and Islamophobia, Countering Otherization. She is an Emmy Award-winning journalist. Anisa brings 12 years covering the arts, 20 years reporting religion, and a lifetime championing Middle East conflict resolution to this conference. Anisa started at Eyewitness News in Boston. I thought you looked familiar.
I was behind the scenes.
And went on to 60 Minutes, PBS, NPR, and National Geographic. She's the first American to report the Hajj for television from Arabia. She's made 3 films on the subject. Her pioneering work in mainstream American media helped broader coverage of Islam and Muslims on the airwaves, and the Society of Professional Journalists writes, current events reporting often confuses faith, culture, and politics. Anisa Mehdi helps sort them out. We look forward to her presentation. Our next presenter will be Yousir Marzouki from Aix-Marseille University and Qatar University. His topic is characterizing online negative stereotypes in response to the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack, the case of Islamophobia in tweeting behavior. Professor Marzouki is an associate professor at Aix-Marseille University, where he teaches cognitive psychology and statistical modeling applied to behavioral sciences. After his postdoc training at Tufts University, where he studied cognitive neuroscience of visual attention, he is currently conducting research at the Laboratoire de Psychologie Cognitive in Marseille, France, focusing on the relationship between emotion, attention, and consciousness. Our third speaker will be Rhonda Itaoui, Western Sydney University's Religion and Society Research Center of Australia. And her topic will be Islamophobia and the spatial mobility of young Australian Muslims in Sydney. Rhonda Itaoui is a second-year PhD candidate at Western Sydney University's Religion and Society Research Center, Australian Endeavour Scholarship awardee and international visiting scholar at UC Berkeley Center for Race and Gender. Her PhD project takes a relational comparative approach to uncovering reflective links between Islamophobia and the spatial mobility of young Muslims in everyday public spaces of Western cities, Sydney and the San Francisco Bay Area. Her field work in the Bay Area commences in April, commenced this April, this week. This month, and it's really, I didn't realize that she was here, so I'm looking forward to getting to know her a little bit better. And she has undertaken a project to enable a relational comparative analysis of potential global manifestations of Islamophobia and its implications across and within the Bay Area and Sydney. So that's going to be interesting to see what those comparisons are like. And last of all, last but not least, as we always say, we have Rizwan Mohammad, Advocacy Coordinator for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And he will be talking about uniting against hate, challenging Islamophobia in the media, the courts, and the public sphere. Rizwan is a graduate of the University of Toronto specializing in Islamic studies. Rizwan Mohammad has been educating Canadian Muslims and the general public about Islam in coordinating national community building initiatives for several years, working on various projects for the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, including Muslim Youth Canada, Common Ground, and Communitas. Rizwan has developed expertise in civic literacy, education, civic engagement training, and community capacity building. Joining the NCCM in 2015 as coordinator for NCCM's Stronger Together National Grassroots Advocacy Initiative, Rizwan works with communities to create, train, and empower teams of Canadian Muslims across the country to mobilize and advocate on both local and national issues. So I welcome all of our speakers and look forward to the enlightening efforts that you will be making for our conference attendees.
Friends and colleagues, the arts can bring people together at a time when it seems the world is splitting apart. It's time we take the arts seriously. In this paper, I will argue that arts connect people, engaging us differently than public policy and politics do. Arts may propel protest and empower community building. They may enrage audiences. They may bring comfort. Even governments, interest groups, and mobs react to art. And sometimes that brings trouble. But mostly the arts call forth something fresh from both artist and aficionado. Creativity and risk, partnership, and individuality, experimentation, and excellence. Arts are an avenue of light down dark streets of despair and bigotry, a call for emotional elevation, an antidote to antipathy. Arts are a path to Rumi's field, where there is no right or wrong. Now, art about Islam made by Muslims or coming from Muslim-majority countries, I assert, may interrupt the cycle of ignorance that otherizes and makes monolithic a huge, diverse, multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural human community. When you are swept into the heartbreak and joy of a story that's not your own, suddenly you see your sister where once you saw a stranger. Arts encourage us to see beyond stereotypes and threats, transforming an irrational fear of Islam into rational inquiry. Where do I point this to make it move? Technology also has an impressive impact on our ability to communicate and relate with other people. Yes. Granada, Isfahan, and a modern interpretation of Tawaf at the Kaaba. Using beauty to bring people together is an honored human tradition, even among Muslims. The 2015 International Islamophobia Conference here at Berkeley ended with a concert called Songs for the Spirit. The 2015 ISNA Conference in Chicago last September presented concerts to boys a cappella groups and rap groups, right? And comics. The idea is to uplift the tired and despairing souls at the end of a day. But those are arts as entertainment. And I know what it's like to do arts as entertainment because for 12 years I reported the arts for New Jersey Public Television. And my piece was called The Kicker at the end of the day, something that the news audiences got to watch so that they knew that not everything was wrong with our world, right? Because the rest of the newscast is about what's going wrong. But arts are more than entertainment. When archaeologists look back at civilizations, how do they judge greatness? With art, sculpture, archaeology, architecture, the remains of paint on walls and stone, decorated plates and pottery, images of people playing instruments and dancing. Archaeologists also look at weapons, So we have creation on one hand and destruction on the other, this bipolarity of human nature. Arts and weapons reveal who we are in our time and also as part of a continuum of all time. In fact, in some ways, modern Islamophobia began with the arts. Television, movies, and racist cartoons that you saw in there are part of our nation's media history. In his book, Real Bad Arabs, the same name as the place that the clip came from, media studies scholar and Arab American Dr. Jack Shaheen points out that, excuse me, amoral villains, maidens, sheikhs, Egyptians, and Palestinians all make cameos in more than 250 movies that have absolutely nothing to do with Arabs or Muslims or the Middle East, in addition to all the examples you saw here. Now forgive me for conflating Arabs and Muslims in these examples. The terms are already conflated in Hollywood and beyond. And that is part of the problem we deal with. It's just not part of the problem I'm dealing with in this paper. On beyond animated cartoons, there are political cartoons. This comes from the Daily News in 1959. Look at the passive and feminized Gamal Abdel Nasser being fawned on by the US and Soviet Union. There was the whole Suez Canal construction and so on at that time. By 1973, artist Bill Malden's Arab is no longer passive. I'm sorry if you can't see it as easily on this side. He is a wicked caricature, now a bully, threatening to use oil as political leverage, even though the oil was under soil that, of this particular whatever nondescript Arab nation. How dare they use oil as leverage? It gets really ugly in 2001. Pat Oliphant's drawing is a scary similarity to 1930s era cartoons of Jews in Germany. While it's no longer acceptable to caricature Jews like this, it is okay to do it to Muslims. These cartoons and TV shows, however, represent only one chapter in a much more hopeful narrative on how the arts intervene for good. Let's start with museums. Pearls on a String opened at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore last fall and is now on exhibit at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. It's up through May 8th. Exhibition curator Amy Landau homed in on the question, who is behind the art? Specifically doing that in order to humanize the players. Pearls on a String focuses on three people, the work of three people. Abul Fazl ibn Mubarak, a writer in 16th century Mughal India. Muhammad Zaman ibn Haji Yusuf, a painter in 17th century Safavid Iran. And the Ottoman Sultan, Mahmud I, an 18th century patron of the arts. Strolling through this exhibit, you can hear the artists and patrons considering the impact of their efforts. Our works point to us, one of them calls out from the past. So gaze after us to our works. Attendance at the Walters Art Museum tripled during the time of this exhibition, and additional evaluative data comes out next month. At the Newark Museum, near my hometown, Wondrous Works, Art and Islam is on exhibit through May 15th. You see some of these rather fantastical images. Palestinian piece of art back on my shoulders. Wondrous Works showcases artwork from Southeast Asia and Central Asia, but also East and West Africa, areas that are often overlooked in exhibitions about Islamic art. And here you see my dean, my imam, Dean Wahideen Sharif, who took people on a tour of this exhibition, one of many tours they offered, pointing to an early 20th century Hayamiya tent panel from Egypt. The inscription reads, "Patience is the key to relief." Along with this exhibit, there was a film festival that highlighted works on interfaith gatherings and relationships among people. All of this was free and open to the public, and gave a deeply humanizing experience to visitors. In January, Walid Raad's Unreality Show closed at New York's Museum of Modern Art. Raad grew up in Civil War Lebanon. His unapologetic spin on Middle East history, as the New York Times reviewer called it, uses the physical traces of the Lebanese Civil War, plus interviews with people who protested against Israel's siege of Lebanon, to help people understand Lebanon's current geopolitical realities. He also gave tours through this exhibit, interacting with visitors regularly. Of course, there is New York's magnificent Metropolitan Museum of Art. And rather than present Islamic art as a monolithic creation, the Met took 8 years to reorganize its nearly 12,000 objects into galleries called the Art of the Arab Lands, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and later South Asia. This is in accordance with preferred terminology that demonolithizes, if I may, the idea of a Muslim world. While the metaculture for all of this art was Muslim, right? Muslim majority cultures, Muslim majority societies, Muslim majority histories, at least for the past 1,400 years, the artists themselves were not all Muslim. Right? There are other people. It's a multi-confessional community, so people other than Muslims were making the art as well. What I want to ask is, how come we don't make the connection between those artists, Muslim or non-Muslim, those artists of then, and their offspring, now, generations later? Today's creative and struggling Muslim communities. I say in part it's because we compartmentalize the past as long ago and far away. We don't recognize the continuum from which we grow, and in which we all function, and into which we will give our legacy. In part it's because we don't see much art by people from Muslim majority societies today. And yet it's out there, bringing people together at a time when it seems our world is splitting apart. Newsweek recently covered an exhibit called From America to Zanzibar, Muslim Cultures, Near and Far, at the Children's Museum of Manhattan. The Children's Museum of Manhattan is one of several recipients of a grant called Building Bridges, a project of the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art. For Zeba Rahman, the Senior Program Officer for Building Bridges, positive artistic experiences build a sense of fraternity, inspire people to think, and also to rethink the positions that each one of us holds. They afford a means of transformation within us, especially now, when fear is elevated and people are anxious. The mission of the Building Bridges program is to advance relationships, increase understanding, and reduce bias between Muslim and non-Muslim communities. On college campuses, Building Bridges programs are already catalyzing social transformation with arts rooted in diverse Muslim cultures. I'll give you a few examples of the Building Bridges projects on college campuses and then present some of the qualitative and anecdotal evidence of the program's success at its early stage. All right. In March 2015, the University of South Florida in Tampa paired with an arts presenter called Art to Action and brought Iraqi-American writer and actress Heather Raffo to stage her new opera, Fallujah. Has anyone heard about this opera? I mean, war has been a subject of opera for many generations, but this is the first opera about the Iraq War. It's based on the experiences of a real American Marine and his platoon that come face to face with real Iraqis that live in the city of Fallujah, and the real-life battle that began in 2004. All the characters are humanized, they're suffering, they're noble, they're hopeful, and they're desperate. In this bit I'm going to show you right now, tenor Caleb Koiku, who was then a senior at USF, sings an aria called Numb. It's about how painful it is for this Marine to feel anything anymore. He feels numb. If I were a tenor, I'd sing it for you, but I'm an alto. If it's too much trouble, we'll just move along. This Marine actually is one of altogether too many American soldiers returning from Iraq who are, he attempted suicide, not this guy, this is a singer, but the real guy, attempted suicide 3 times. And the opera is set in the hospital where he is revisiting his suicide attempts, but he's under 24-hour surveillance so that he won't kill himself. Do you know that every 2 hours, an American soldier or military person returning from Iraq commits suicide? So shall we move on?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. Just so you know, this opera was produced in full, recently presented by the Long Beach Opera Company in California, and you can look it up online. There's some stories about it and excerpts and clips. Now this one I really hope we get audio. Muslim Women's Voices was a production at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. They did a whole series of residencies and performances over the year, and one of them was called Planet Hip Hop. How many of you know there's an active community of Muslim women hip hop performers? All right, great. So I'm going to play a clip. What's that say? 5. There might even be more. I'm going to show you 3. 2 are New Yorkers and 1 is Algerian. I'll leave it up to you to figure out who is who. Everybody say Bismillah.
Ride to like amusement parks with my father, like Public Enemy, that's the soundtrack that you hear.
history, and so I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be part of something that could leave a legacy behind. I have this allegiance to my culture, to my people, where I don't want to like offend anybody, but at the same time I have this urge to be the best version of myself without any boundaries, without any limitations. So to find that balance, I think that's how my culture and the religion I was brought up into helped provide me with that other perspective.
Okay. Sadly, I don't want to overstay my welcome, so I'm going to have to abridge what I've hoped to show you. But I will say that we have with us in the room Alan Brown, who was working with this program on the evaluative part. Alan is from the Wolf Brown consulting firm based in San Francisco, one of the nation's premier organizations that works with nonprofits in figuring out their strategic plans and how successful they have been. Alan will help answer questions later. As Dr. Rania Awad pointed out earlier today, narratives aren't going to cut it, but we do have anecdotal accounts that show inroads of understanding and appreciation that have resulted on these campuses as a result of these programs. Things like someone who saw Fallujah said, "I've never experienced something like that. It made me want to be more aware of what's going on in the world." Students discovered, other students of color said they connected the discrimination that Muslims face to their own experiences as people of color. And that's what education is about, right? Increasing your knowledge and assessing your own place in the world and being willing to question your place. I'm going to conclude with two statements. One is, because the arts can bring people together at a time when it seems our world is splitting apart, we should take them seriously. And additional efforts, additional funding, and additional attention to this transformational tool must be undertaken at academic institutions. I will also say that the arts take us into other lives and other cultures, and once we've gone there, we can't pretend we haven't been. So, arts live in Jalaluddin Rumi's now famous field. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to Professor Hatem for having me. So today I'm going to talk about new topics in psychology research, which is about the use of social networking as a corpora to understand some collective behaviors. And of course, people reacted towards many events, and the idea here is to try to understand the cognitive and affective mechanism underlying people reaction towards these events, including traumatic ones like terrorist attack. So the case I'll be discussing today is about Islamophobia imputing behavior toward the Yousir event that happened last year in France. Just quick introduction regarding the digital penetration, because for a while we thought that the digital world or virtual world is separate than our real world. But with the assumption of social networking, this is not true anymore. we'll talk about the collusion effect between these two worlds. So everything that happened in our digital life is mirrored in our real life and vice versa. So these numbers reveal that the penetration rate, for example, of social networking, this is the last number, it was recorded in January 2016, that we have 31% of active social media users in the planet from the total, children included. And this is not going to stop as a trend. Of course, from a psychological perspective, these behaviors, the real behavior that we know in our real life, will get boosted in a tremendous way in social networking. And I call this the catalyst effect. The space will be shrunken, the time will be squeezed, the anonymity will be enhanced. The bonding in real life is effortful. You need to find time, space, energy, money. But in social networking, it will be just effortless. And finally, everything happening in real life is following a slow process, but it is at a viral speed in social networking. So, a quick word about the methodology. Twitter as a corpus is new as a line of research, as I told you. So, using Twitter data as a corpus will help us investigate conversational characteristics of users. And these characteristics are mainly, can be tracked very easily from technological point of view by following these keywords called the hashtags. And many authors consider these hashtags as shared conversational markers, real markers to follow in a very dynamic way the whole processes involved on time regarding any kind of controversy, opinion, or event. In addition, the scale and the speed at which these conversations happen so fast and are comparable to what we call an epidemic speed. These authors, for example, used the co-occurrence, and this is very, very important aspects when we do cognitive studies or cognitive research, is to uncover something that we call implicit mechanism, because the narrative can be explicit, but it can be also implicit. Co-occurrence between specific keywords really can be a good way to reveal these hidden trends when we deal with a corpora coming from social networking. And that's why we have these two dimensions, the discussion and the reactions. The discussion is more cognitively based mechanism, and we have the reaction, which is more, let's say, effectively and emotionally charged mechanisms. And it's important to decipher both, to disentangle both, and try to understand the underlying mechanisms online. This study, the most relevant one, which is done the first 4 days after the event or the shooting of the Je suis Charlie, these authors, they consider two different hashtags, the famous Je suis Charlie hashtag. And the shift, and they studied the shift from the affirmative one, because Je suis Charlie in France, in English, I am Charlie. And then with the rise, the first occurrence of the Je ne suis pas Charlie, I'm not Charlie, they tried to understand the conflict between these two hashtags and the whole aura of opposing narratives, one that is affirmative and the other that is completely negative. Okay, so sorry, it's Je suis Charlie, but Je suis pas Charlie. And this, they revealed the interesting hidden patterns such as activism, grief, resistance, ethnocentrism, and Islamophobia by studying a data set of more than 74,000 posted tweets collected between the 7th and the 11th of January 2015. And we consider that our study here is just the follow-up of this period, because we consider that this first disruption is paramount to create what we call the backlash effect. Because people, when they reacted immediately to traumatic event, they have this like storm of affective, immediate, primal, visceral reactions. But there is no thinking. Like some of them, they just tweeted Je suis Charlie, that they don't even know what Je suis Charlie means. It's just out of solidarity they do that. And one important thing is that the people that use Je ne suis pas Charlie, the negative hashtag, they are Muslim, they are not Muslim, they don't even give any credit to violence in any form, but they are just don't feel themselves belonging to this category Je suis Charlie. They are against the social labeling imposed on them. So this disruption created some sort of backlash effect. And the study here is trying to understand what's going on over the following weeks and how to understand this from a psychological perspective. Another important indicator, behavior indicator online is the retweeting behavior. There is not only tweeting, but how fast and how often I can retweet one particular tweet. So the retweets, some studies, recent studies showed that we have like two different classes. The first one, the retweet, they are associated with events, emergency events. I don't know, like trauma, catastrophe, etc. And others are associated with ceremonial events. So we noticed that the first ones, the first category, elicit more original tweets because they are more about individual filter. How can I perceive the traumatic event from a very individual perspective? So these retweets will be very helpful for us to understand what's going on here. So a quick reminder of what happened last year. So on 7 January 2015, Islamist gunmen armed with assault rifles entered the office of the magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris and opened fire on the publication journalists and cartoonists. So the result is very heavy. We have the editor Sharp dead, along with 7 other members of the Charlie Hebdo staff, 1 random visitor that came to the building this day, 1 member of the maintenance staff, and 2 police officers were killed as well. Of course, there were an immediate reaction on and offline in the whole planet, and this support is mainly based on support towards the magazine freedom of expression, and it was primarily mirrored in social networking through the hashtag Je suis Charlie. Of course, there is an equivalent, there is a visual equivalent of that on Facebook, but the primary reaction was done on Twitter. Of course, although the focus was on claiming strongly the freedom of expression, journalism, but this didn't prevent many to express themselves with tweets full of violent, harsh, and criticism toward Islam, Muslim world, generally speaking. And this can be generated from a lot of factors, including some sort of confusion, biases, stereotyping, anger, and it is important to understand what's going on. So here I'm going to show you a very interesting map that will illustrate in a dynamic way during the 24 hours following the first tweet ever published, ever posted, containing the Je suis Charlie hashtag. So each yellow dot here represents a geolocalized tweet containing the hashtag Je suis Charlie. So I'll let you decide how fast this was, sorry. And as I told you, it's a viral speed, it's an epidemic scale. This is only during 24 hours. Okay, so this is following just the hashtag Je suis Charlie. And each yellow point is, so if you tweeted that time using the same hashtag, you will be there, for sure. Okay, so the velocity was estimated, this is rough estimation, 4,500 per minute. Yes, that's what, when we deal with this kind of corporate, it's different than just dealing with rigorous surveys and questionnaires, etc. So what we did here, we come up like, we have to open a channel to collect the data. But we need to narrow down, of course, the data according to our hypothesis and what we're looking at. And we use these particular hashtags. And following the first period that has been studied by the other authors, the regarding Je ne suis pas Charlie versus Je suis Charlie. And we narrow it down to roughly more than 400,000 tweets. And as you can see here, as you notice, the first period, the tweeting behavior is more frequent, and then there is a decline over time. Okay, the first thing we did, that we ran a word cloud, and the word cloud is a visual technique that helps us understand what's the most frequent used word in the corpus, in the last corpus. And here, the word cloud is full of negativity. As you may see, we have attack, terror, death, shame, fight, abuse, blood, terrorist, massacre, threat, and the list is long. And this is the most frequent word in this set of data. But we know, the other hand, that there is some sort of backlash effect. Where does backlash effect come from? This is the scientific question asked here. One of the things to look at is the co-occurrences between keywords that we call target words and the association with other words. Of course, we have a bunch of words, we have a list, but for the sake of briefness, I took only two. So, to give you an idea. The first one is the word Islam. We took Islam and we go back to the corpus and plotted the most frequent co-occurrence with the word Islam. And the co-occurrence is more about implicit mechanism, because maybe in your narrative, spontaneous narrative, you will associate Islam with other things. And it's important to see where this connection goes here, or all these connections. So this is what we did exactly. What you have here, we have the most frequent, the 30 most frequent co-occurrence with the word Islam. So just to show you that few of these words, because this is the second week, this is the most negative ones, they didn't show up very early. Okay? We have offensive, we have attacks, radical, but some of the positive words that we have here, for example, mankind, truth, facing, and even future, are starting. It's the first seed of the backlash effect. The first seed of the backlash effect. This is the first week of our study. Remember, we have 5 weeks. Let's go now to the one in the middle and the last one. There is a significant drop, but some of the negative words were pushed back to the first row to show that there is a movement of this. At the beginning, they didn't associate Islam with negativity immediately, but over time, it gets associated with Islam. But the last week, the backlash effect happened. And we can see that all the negatives are pushed back at the end of the series. They are less frequent than at the beginning. We did the same thing with the word Arab and Arabs, because there is a confusion between Muslim, Arab, etc. And here the same thing, it is more controversial compared to Islam, because here we have a categorization process between on the group, ex the group, and we can see that negativity appearing immediately at the beginning of the list, although it was hard to find some positive words. We have intellectual and stereotypical for people trying to thwart this negativity coming from the tweets using association between Arab and other words. Yes, so, yeah, and please don't ask me what the heck the word jazz is doing here. I have absolutely no idea. But I'm going to figure that out very soon. Don't worry. Okay. It is maybe, I don't know, some sort of think tank, or I don't know. Really, it is, it's a mystery. Okay, we did the same thing with the two other bins on time. This one showed almost the same results as we have negativity pushed to the top of the list, and then there is a backlash effect with a few negativity appearing at the end of the period of the study. And now, remember I've told you about the retweeting behavior, and at this time we studied the whole set of data. And now we said, what about the super tweets, the tweets that get retweeted the most? And we took the 2%, the top 2%, we got a very few sample, 173 super tweets. only that. And we contrast this, of course, their composition with the remainder of the tweets, which is a big number. The results show that we have more negative tweets with lower valence. When we talk about valence here, we talk about positively affected, negatively affected. And we have more negative tweets in non-super tweeters than in the super tweeters. So the super tweeters, the tweet that get tweeted the most, are less negative than the remainder of the tweets. And because we're talking about this dynamic conflict between the on the group versus the exo group, we examine also the use of the pronouns in these tweets, the I versus the we, and we got that these super tweets are more likely to contain I than we pronouns. So that's why it's easier for the non-super tweet to use we as a contrast, on the group as a contrast to the exo group. So there is a more clear contour separating their group from the outside group. And the use of the I means that there is a personal point of view. It's not necessarily biased, but most important is an original tweet, because it's using the I. And we also plotted the negative tweets from the super tweets toward Islam compared to the positive one. And look at the difference. They are mostly positive. And we did the same thing. We plot the word cloud for the super tweets. And surprisingly, they are capitalizing on the persona of the Prophet, contrary to the other tweets coming from the whole set, which means that this aura is more about not concrete words, more abstract words, like freedom, mankind, love, etc. So these are the seeds that will create, of course, the backlash effect, and this is what we get here. So the idea is very simple. Let's say that with this simple mechanism that we have a rise of emotional reaction, followed by counter opinions, and then there is the settlement of this backlash effect. And then we ask this question: if this is true, let's go back now and look to the use of emoticons, because emoticons are indicators of spontaneous emotional reaction. And if we get a similar trend, then our hypothesis is corroborated. This is indeed the case. We plotted here all the tweets using emoticons from the beginning to the end of the period of the study. And as you can see, the rise of the use of emoticon associated with all the tweets is peaking at the beginning, and then there is this decline, significant decline, because people are taking a step back and thinking about how should I tweet this from emotional reaction point of view or cognitive reaction point of view. We have more rationalization during the process. As a take-home message, so first thing that the valence finding here capture different early affective reaction toward the dramatic event in the network. We interpreted this progressively, so there is a decrease of the negativity in the non-super tweeters as evidence of a backlash effect. Second thing, so this significant contrast between super tweets and the non-super tweets could be an indicator of a disruption of the network, collective behavior, but triggered by these sub-communities tweeting differently and in a very original way. So they are going on the reverse compared to the main wave of emotional reactions. Last, the emergence of online negative stereotypes, and here per se we're talking about Islamophobia, from naturally occurring social media data allows us to characterize the way pro- and anti-Islam online communities evolve in response to adverse events such as a terrorist attack. Finally, I would like to thank, a special thank to my close collaborator in this project, Samira Sheikh and Professor Rizwan from SUNY University. And one of the codes that I find really relevant to that, because we're studying completely invisible relationship between people, is this quote by Nietzsche saying that invisible threads are the strongest ties. Thanks for your attention.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for having me today and giving me the opportunity to share my research with you all. I guess as a young Muslim growing up in Australia in a post 9/11 climate, this is a topic I'm very passionate about, and hearing different perspectives from around the world on something that has affected me and many people that I love and care about is moving and very stimulating. So I'm very lucky to be here and to also be spending the next year on this beautiful campus. So my short paper today is reporting on a 2014 pilot case study I conducted with young Muslims living in Sydney. And I was interested in exploring the reflexive relationship between experiences of Islamophobia and the spatial mobility of young Muslims across the city of Sydney. So in the context of the 2015 Sydney siege and the 2005 Cronulla riot, I aim to highlight the need to start to interrogate the socio-spatial dimensions of Islamophobia and hopefully show that my case study has addressed this gap in conceptual understanding, but then also propose my future work that I'll be conducting in the San Francisco Bay Area to build on this understanding. And at the end of my presentation, I of course open the floor to your recommendations and advice on my upcoming work that is very much in preliminary stages at the moment. So looking at the Sydney siege, on the 15th of December 2014, a lone gunman, Harry Moniz, held hostage 10 customers and 8 employees at the Lint Chocolate Cafe located in Martin Place. So early on, the hostages were seen holding an Islamic black flag up against the window of the cafe, featuring the Shahada Creed. Now, initially the media mistook it as the flag being used by ISIL, and of course this was streamed ongoingly throughout the day live from the site. Now, the Australian Prime Minister at the time, Tony Abbott, took this opportunity to describe it as a political motivation, describing the event as a terrorist attack, and then very quickly an assessment of Moniz indicated that he was on bail for previous sexual assault charges, and he had extreme mental health problems, and then a mix of extremist ideologies and just plain criminality. So although this treatment of the event as a terrorist attack changed, the immediate aftermath of the siege was of course a period of unease, where Australian Muslims were filled with fear about their safety around the city, with live media reporting of the event occurring at the time. Now, what was really interesting was the wider community, the Australian community, expressed concern for this potential for racism to start to occur during the aftermath of the siege. So alongside anti-Muslim posts on social media that usually eventuate after an attack, the wider community actually expressed solidarity and emotional support by tweeting the hashtag I'll ride with you. Now, it reached over 120,000 tweets by the end of that month, and also grabbed quite a lot of international attention, so you might have already heard of the hashtag before. Now, this wide public acknowledgement of how a local terror event could have immediate implications on the way Muslims feel or experience belonging in public spaces certainly suggests a direct association between these local or global terror attacks and the politics of the racial experience in urban spaces amongst Muslims living in Western cities like Sydney. So as evident in the vast range of perspectives that we've heard at this conference, we know that researchers from a wide range of disciplines have documented an increase in anti-Muslim sentiment, and we know that it's only intensifying with recent terror attacks that keep occurring around the world and the politicisation of these events. So it is due to this research that we know that Islamophobia impacts Muslims in the West, especially Australia, in areas like education, workplace discrimination, navigating the housing market, and an overall sense of belonging. But we are yet to engage critically in the way Islamophobia impacts Muslims in the public sphere. So, more importantly, the ability for Muslims to feel comfortable and safe in everyday public spaces across the cities that they live in. So, in the Australian context, approaches to Islamophobia as a form of new racism have made attempts at explaining how Islamophobia operates across space. And these perspectives generally explore the way the Muslim has been racialised in the Australian imaginary, so based on cultural indicators and stereotypes like religious attire or having a Muslim name. So at this moment, Forrest and Dunn in 2007 mapped racial attitudes across Sydney, including anti-Muslim attitudes. And through this mapping, they've promoted an interrogation of how public spaces are embedded with social meanings around belonging, freedom, and citizenship. But more deeply, the developments in literature around geographies of racism encourage us to start to consider how those disqualified from the public space develop mental maps of exclusion based on those experiences. Now, what is missing from these debates, however, is an empirical understanding of how mental maps of exclusion can translate into patterns of spatial disengagement, so how a person would use public spaces after experiencing racism. So I guess my question that I wanted to address was, how does Islamophobia impact the spatial mobility of young Muslims across public spaces in Western cities like Sydney? So in an attempt to unpack this potential relationship, I conducted a small mixed method case study, as I mentioned earlier, with young Muslims in Sydney. And the first part of the study was a web-based survey, and was only launched for a week, so a small sample of around 100 respondents. And it aimed to gauge the way young Muslims perceive certain regions across Sydney, alongside the geographies of racism prescribed in 2007. So did the perceptions of Islamophobia amongst young Muslims match the geographies of racial attitudes mapped almost a decade ago? And the interviews also followed up from the surveys with interested participants, and they start to unpack this geography and why young Muslims felt that Islamophobia was concentrated in certain parts of the city more than others. So if we take a look at this section of the survey, this is one example of a region, so at the Sydney CBD, the participants ranked the regions on perceptions of multiculturalism, how tolerant they felt the space was, whether they perceived the area to be associated with levels of high levels of racism, how comfortable they felt in that area, and perceptions of safety as well. So if we take a look here at the average scores of those semantic scales I presented, you can see that there is a clear spatial distribution to how Islamophobia is perceived across space. So if you look at Sydney's western suburbs, they were perceived most positively, and it's to no surprise, Western Sydney has a large Muslim population, a large concentration of the Muslim community in Sydney. And then you have the rest of Sydney is seen quite neutrally in the middle. And then you have areas like Sutherland who are perceived as being negative areas associated with high levels of Islamophobia. And I will come back to the Sutherland region in the other parts of my presentation. So I'm just going to give a quick summary of the interview data and what it pointed to. So once I analysed this data, me and the participants discussed the geography. So I asked them why they felt that, firstly themselves and other young Muslims perceived Islamophobia to be concentrated in certain parts of Sydney. And the first thing that they spoke about were their personal experiences of Islamophobia. So whether they had had an encounter in a certain area and then felt unsafe or unwilling to engage in that space again, or they also pointed to the experiences of their family members and friends. And a bad experience of a family member was enough for them to never visit that space if they didn't have to. So if it wasn't for work reasons, they would never really use suburbs of Sydney in a recreational way if someone had had a bad experience there. Now, as interesting as that data was, I don't have time to present on it, and I thought that in line with the theme of this panel, I'm going to focus on how young Muslims drew on mainstream media reporting of Islamophobic events. So especially the Cronulla riots in 2005, and how they used this reporting of those events to justify their reluctance to engage in certain spaces across Sydney. So as we saw earlier, Sutherland was associated with the highest levels of Islamophobia by the survey respondents, and it's to no surprise because it is home to Cronulla, the same place where the Cronulla riot occurred in 2005. So this was a large-scale racially violent event where around 5,000 people gathered on Cronulla Beach to, quote, show wogs that this is our beach and that they are never welcome, unquote. Now, although the riot at the time had a strong anti-Arab sentiment, recent commentaries have actually emphasised the Islamophobic undertones of the event and that it was mainly Islamophobic. And there were many very offensive slurs imprinted on their bodies, but I just think that they are too offensive to display. And they were very Islamophobic. So 10 years on, the event has clearly left a mark on the young Muslim perspectives of this region. So I thought I'd just give you a breakdown of the semantics just for the Sutherland region. And you can see that the participants associated with Sutherland with very low levels of multiculturalism. They perceived it to be an intolerant and racist space, and also low levels of comfort and safety in the area. And when asked how likely they were to engage in public spaces in the Sutherland area, you can see that around 62% of participants had mentioned that they were to some degree unlikely to use areas in Sutherland based on their perceptions of the space. So I'm just going to give you a few testimonials. Again, not enough time to give you as much as I would like to. But upon conducting the interviews, the Cronulla riot was definitely a rationale that every participant mentioned. They all mentioned the Cronulla riot and said that their perception of Sutherland had definitely changed after that event. And so if we can take a look here, a 21-year-old male from Greenacre, which is a suburb in Western Sydney, explains that when people think of Sutherland, they think, well, it might not be right, but I still do judge the entire Sutherland on Cronulla suburb. And hearing about Cronulla now, I just can't help but think back to the Cronulla riots. You come to think of Cronulla as not a very accepting suburb. If you look here at a 29-year-old female from Strathfield, also a Western Sydney area, she says, seeing it on the TV and news in the aftermath, I put it in this extreme category, but I never go there, just because it's so far away. And you know, my perspective of the riots. The Cronulla riots all those years ago today will make me think, do I really want to go there? Do I really want to go to Miranda Shopping Centre? What's it going to be like if I go there? So you can see how the Cronulla riot, although on the beach, has also impacted the willingness to engage in the area overall, even just shop in a local shopping centre. So what I felt, looking at these perspectives, we definitely have attention to the direct link between the media constructions of Cronulla Beach as an Islamophobic space, and then a subsequent disengagement from the beach and its surrounding suburbs. So if we look at the existing debates about the role of the media and the rise in anti-Muslim sentiment, we can see the way the media plays a dual role in marginalising Australian Muslims. So not only is it providing the conditions that fuel these racist attacks and large-scale anti-Muslim sentiment, but it then also perpetuates its pedagogical impacts on the Muslims who are being taught where they do or where they do not belong, or where they can or can't go across the city. So I guess the relevance of these findings today, 10 years after the Cronulla riot, lies in the way this Islamophobic event continues to restrict the spatial mobility capacities of everyday Australian Muslims. And we see how Islamophobia has direct reflexive implications on how the other can freely access and engage in the public sphere. So we can see how the public space can't continue to be neglected in public academic and policy debates. It's something that should definitely be conducted in an interdisciplinary fashion, and I really hope that this work can try to encourage that. So in saying so, the future considerations should start to interrogate the role of the public space in experiences of inclusion or exclusion. So how are these experiences, how do they manifest in the public space, or how do they exacerbate belonging or a lack of belonging? So in terms of looking at the media, we can see how the reporting of these events continue to enable lines of whiteness to be drawn around public spaces. And this is, of course, in an attempt to dictate where the Muslim other does or does not belong, or where they should or should not access spaces. So it is in unpacking and demystifying these spatial impacts that we can start to address the link between racism and mobility, and then theorise what compelled the Australian public to sympathetically assure Muslims, I'll ride with you, following the Sydney siege in December last year. So I guess my preliminary analysis of this link obviously requires further interrogation and a larger sample, but I think that there's much to offer in looking at other ethnic minorities around the world as well, in other contexts, and exploring the links between racism and mobility in their lives. So just, I am finishing up, but I just wanted to give a brief of my upcoming study. So I'm not out in the field just yet. I'm still trying to familiarise myself with the suburbs and the place, which is amazing. I'm loving it here. But the reason why I chose the San Francisco Bay Area for my relational comparison amongst many other Western cities was mainly inspired by the Bay Area Muslim study that pointed my attention to the fact that San Francisco Bay Area is home to one of the largest concentrations, so geographical concentrations of Muslims in the USA, and Muslims comprise 3.5% of the Bay Area population, which is a very similar percentage to the Sydney Muslim population. And most troubling is that 77% of participants felt Muslim discrimination was a problem. So similar to Sydney, people always misconstrue, I think, urban spaces or urban areas like the Bay Area and Sydney as being multicultural and accepting and diverse. But I think when we start to unpack the layers, there is clearly a problem. So I'm hoping to apply my spatial lens and respond to the call for more research on Islamophobia in the Bay Area. And also, I guess in my recognition that cities are interconnected in this global world, I hope that my relational comparison can use the two different cities to pose questions about the way Islamophobia is operating both locally and globally across these contexts, and how it manifests in the urban landscapes of the two cities. So in this instance, I'll be asking how the global and local events impact the way young Muslims in the Bay Area experience Islamophobia, and more importantly, in what way do these experiences shape how they access urban spaces across the region. So I'm hoping my fieldwork has much to offer in comparison to the Sydney Muslim experience, but I do welcome your feedback and guidance on my future work here, and I really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Bismillah, assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Rizwan Mohammad, and on behalf of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, my thanks to our panel chair, Dr. Calvin Keys of Zaytuna College, and Dr. Hatem Bazian and the UC Berkeley Center for Race and Gender's Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project for hosting this conference and inviting our participation all the way from Canada. Today, I would like to draw your attention to a Canadian Muslim national institutional response to Islamophobia in the media and the public sphere. I will begin by saying a few words about the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the NCCM, and our working definition of Islamophobia, and then I will discuss how the NCCM responds to Islamophobia in mainstream Canadian discourses, in mainstream Canadian media discourses. First, just a quick word about this title. Uniting Against Hate. What does that really look like? I hope people can see at the back. I'm going to draw your attention to a couple of features of this image and maybe return to talking a little bit more about uniting against hate towards the end of my presentation. So you can see, I don't know if you can hear me if I step away from the mic. I'll try to raise my voice. One of the things that you can see in this picture is, so a little bit of background. This was based on a tweet that went viral from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in November 2015. He had 3 pictures, and he simply tweeted, and this was the 3rd picture of the 3, and he tweeted, "Welcome to Canada," and he was greeting Syrian refugees. And interestingly, it's hard to tell how many people are actually Syrian refugees who have newly arrived and people who are there who are greeting them. You can see, if you look closely, there's about maybe 3 or 4 visibly Muslim women in the crowd. You can see the center or the focus of the image is Mr. Trudeau, surrounded by the people, and he's in the tie, he's in the middle there. And then you can see closer to the frame on the bottom right corner, the Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne. And you can see the Sikh gentleman who's a little bit to the left and a little above Premier Wynne, our Justice, our Minister of Defense, who's actually a part of who's maybe, I think, historically one of the first, if not the first, to serve in a position as Minister of Defense, who actually served in the military as well. And he fought in Afghanistan, and his record is somewhat controversial. That's a whole other story. And you can see, so in terms of the politicians that are there, that's something interesting to keep in mind as I talk about this and when I talk about power, NCCM and power, and our connection to power. And you can see at the very far back, if you look closely, there are some security officials, but you don't really see the police that are with Prime Minister Trudeau. They're not really in the frame, and that's kind of something I think to think about. And then you can see in the foreground, in the bottom of the frame, you can see news cameras and news media, and then you can see a handful of people who are actually in the frame who are holding up their smartphones and presumably to take pictures, like to take selfies of themselves like in the scene. And that's something I think interesting when we talk about social media and that dimension of it. I would like to say at the outset, our vision, the NCCM's vision of uniting against hate is not this. And maybe we can talk a little bit about why. So who are the National Council of Canadian Muslims? We used to be called CARECAN, and in 2013 we reformed as the National Council of Canadian Muslims to focus more on our mandate as Canadian Muslims and serving Canadian Muslims, and to make that explicitly clear in how we've branded and how we've framed who we are and what we do. The NCCM, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, is an independent, non-partisan and non-profit organization dedicated to protecting the human rights and civil liberties of Canadian Muslims, and by extension of all Canadians, promoting their public interests, building mutual understanding, and challenging Islamophobia and other forms of xenophobia and racism. The NCCM is currently the only national Muslim-led human rights and civil liberties organization in Canada. Serving just over 1 million Canadian Muslims, we answer calls from across the country involving discrimination and human rights abuses, offer suggestions, advice, referrals, and guidance to community members who sometimes need up to a full year or more of support and follow-up. When I was in the office, I'm based out of Toronto, and when I was in the office in Ottawa, the phones were just ringing off the hook. We didn't have enough bodies in the dugout, in the trenches, to actually even keep up with the call volume and the email volume that we were receiving from citizens or from people in the community all over the country, and from media, and from law enforcement and government. It was a really broad range of people trying to interface with us constantly. We have about 40 ongoing cases of discrimination open at any time, approximately 100 reported to us each year. We are the only national Canadian Muslim organization collecting and keeping data on a variety of specific human rights complaints, including travel and border issues that are relevant to our understanding of current trends affecting our communities. We're also called upon regularly to answer critical questions about Canadian Muslims and Islam in the media, on television, in print, on the radio, and elsewhere. Here is a quick glimpse at what our media engagement looks like. While you're kind of listening to this clip, I would like you to maybe ask yourselves this question: how should a national Muslim human rights and civil liberties organization respond to Islamophobic media discourses? Here's a glimpse of what we do. It's about 1.5 minutes length. I'm going to need sound for this.
Joining us now from Ottawa is Amira El-Gawabi. She is a human rights coordinator for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And Isam Gardi is our guest panelist tonight. He's the executive director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims.
Do you believe that this anti-terror legislation is balanced what is this really about? Is this truly about addressing the causes and the issues that we need to be addressing as a country, or is this about pandering to a political base?
This can't be a half-hearted battle against terrorism. Where do you stand in light of these allegations?
The NCCM is not going to submit to a litmus test of loyalty used against Canadian Muslims and their institutions. We are here today to answer questions about Bill C-51 and the real concerns of Canadians, including Canadian Muslims.
This interactive online map is a new way to track and report anti-Muslim incidents. It's all part of an awareness campaign from the National Council of Canadian Muslims.
At least we can get up-to-the-minute sort of picture as to what's happening across Canada. So we don't have to wait up to 2 years to get that data. We'll be finding it out as we go.
So before we talk about this specific recommendation, you've read the report. What's your overall impression of it?
My overall impression, Lucy, is this is a missed opportunity, and we have some serious concerns and reservations about this report, which really could have provided some guidance and real solutions.
We have to speak loudly and clearly against this and stand against hate wherever it's coming from.
Okay, well, you both did that tonight. I appreciate you being here. Amira Al-Gawabi and Nolan Raboudi, nice to meet you, and nice to see you again.
We've gotten in a fair bit of trouble for anybody that's been following what's been going on. With the last federal government, we got involved in a lawsuit, a defamation lawsuit, when the Prime Minister tried to basically say some things that are extremely false about any ties to terrorism. And there's a video actually on NCCM's YouTube channel that talks about the 6 degrees of separation. It's like that game that people play with Kevin Bacon, where we tried to kind of say, well, how does that connection possibly get made? We tried to problematize that and interrogate it a little bit, and it's animated, and you can have a look at it if you'd like. I'll say a little bit more about some of the things that you heard as I go. But first, a little bit more about our working definition. Now, the IRDP's working definition for this conference is beautiful. It's amazing. There's a lot of nuance. There is some clarity about the colonial or post-colonial forces, global forces that play into Islamophobia, and it's concise. But for our purposes as a community organization, what we found is that our working definition of Islamophobia has been based really primarily on a simpler